Hey, everybody. Good morning. I'm so short compared to that. Welcome. Thank you all for coming today. My name is Joy Midori, and I'm a part of Braveheart, which is, so for those of you who don't know, this is Blue Root Vineyard Church. They meet Saturday nights, Sunday mornings, 9 and 11, and Braveheart is a part of Blue Root Vineyard Church. It's their anti-human trafficking ministry. I've been with Braveheart for about 5 years, and it's really a special group. I'll tell you a little bit more about us in a little bit, but I'm going to invite our senior pastor of BRV to come up and pray us in this morning. So, Mark Tyndall, if you could come up. Thank you.
Hey guys, glad you're here. Some of you I know, some of you I don't. I'm really interested to have Christian here speaking, but also just want to say that James has been a huge influencer in my life, like one of the guys that's really been a shaping kind of partner in life, a long-time leader of our church, and love Braveheart. I love that you guys are doing this, and let me just open us in prayer. I love that you father us, Lord. I love that you have a heart that motivated out of love. You would just lead us into the very best. And I pray that you do that this morning through James and Christian, through the work of Braveheart, through the different churches that are represented here. Father us, Lord, and lead us into good things, and let your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Amen.
Thank you guys so much for being here. I guess just a few, what do they call them, housekeeping items. That's what people say. You guys should have gotten one of these when you come in. I just wanted to walk you through what they are. The front is the program for the day. We are going to try to stick to the schedule. We might actually get done a little bit early, which on a Saturday is okay. The back is some information about our key speakers, James and Chris, and some information on how you can get connected with them to donate. We also have here, which is really important, a resource list of folks who have been doing this work. There's websites, there's talks, there's books. So feel free to check these out. There's also a sign-in sheet out front. So if you check the box that says you want this resource list via email, you can kind of get the links, and it's a little easier than typing it all in. Just let us know, and I will send that out this week. And then we have here, so Chris and Nui, his wife, are here from Thailand. They live in Bangkok, and Chris is going to be sharing with us today, but this is a card with their information, how you can get in contact with them, different ways that you can donate and support the work that they're doing. And then this is my favorite part. There's this blank index card. It's the best part. This is we have index cards out on the tables as well. And what we'd like is if you guys have any prayer requests that you'd like Braveheart and our prayer team to be praying for, you can write in anonymously, you can write in your name, you can write in for a friend, because we really do want to be interceding and praying for the people in this room and the people in your lives. So fill this out, and we're going to pass around a basket later. You can toss it in. And then out on the tables during the break or at any time during the day, if you want to grab an index card and just kind of write encouragements to James and Chris. We have boxes out there. You can ask George, our lovely George, who's at the registration table, where to put those items. And we really just want to really thank both of you guys for the work that you do, the fact that you're here, and we want to encourage you prayerfully as well. So, why am I here? Why is an anti-trafficking group doing this event? I'm going to answer some of those questions that you guys might have. So, let me get my paper. Fit well in my purse, but not so much. So, I am going to read something that I wrote. This is a topic that is really close to my heart. And I wanted the words to be just right. So I am going to read to you guys something that I wrote to kind of answer the question of why an anti-trafficking group is involved in this work, and why me, a seemingly very random lady, is talking to you about it. So I've been working with Braveheart, which is this church's anti-trafficking group, for about 5 years, and a little over 5 years. And one of the things that really sets this group apart is that we faithfully pray not only for victims of trafficking, but for traffickers and for those who are buying sex, those who are exploiting others, because we really want God to capture the hearts and lives of everyone. And I love that this group is so faithful to that. So in addition to my work with Braveheart, I also co-chair Delaware County's coalition. It's DCAT, and we do a lot of trainings in the community for service providers. We partner with law enforcement. We train churches and community members, and I've been doing that for a few years. And most importantly, I have the immense honor of working directly with young ladies who have survived the horrors of sex trafficking. That is my full-time job. I'm with them 40 hours a week. And I do see on a daily basis the devastation and the trauma and the tremendous obstacles that these women face as a direct result of their trafficking. 5 years ago, God gave me a heart for these women, and he called me into a life of bringing a really tender love and justice. He called me to show them love and support where there was little to none, and to be a light in their lives, to testify to the truths of God and to contest the lies of the enemy. I come from a background and a family that has been riddled with physical and sexual violence. I myself am a survivor of over a decade of childhood sexual abuse. And I tell you all this because I think that my story gives weight to my words. I think that these things about me testify to the weight of my plead for us to stretch a loving hand out to those who find themselves in a pit of shame and isolation due to the torments of sin reigning in their lives too. Outside of the victims, these men, their lives are being deeply affected and ruined by sin. And I care about that. So I care about that, and I don't advocate for this type of love for these people ignorantly. I am personally and professionally aware of the devastation that this particular type of sin has in the lives of others. And it does break my heart. But my heart breaks as deeply for those who are in the pit and who really have so few people searching for them to pull them out. I hope that my standing here helps to emphasize just how tender God's heart towards his kids is. These kids who are often written off as the problem. I've seen a great need for compassion, for truth, for grace, and for healing for those who are caught in this sin. And it's a sin that's easy for outsiders to point a finger at and shame without any hesitation. But really, to summarize, a person, just by their behavior, is a huge disservice. Because the truth is that each of us are created and deeply loved by God. And my heart breaks for men who are discarded. Those who are degraded to anything less than a human being who is created in the image of God for the purpose of bearing God's light and glory in this world. I have hoped for a day like today where I would get to see a room full of people rallying for this justice, for this love, this mercy, and this truth to be heard and embraced within the anti-trafficking movement and within our churches. So again, I thank you for being here today. I want to share with you a few verses that God has laid on my heart, and then we'll welcome our first speaker. So I'll read it from up here. It's bigger. So husbands ought also to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church, because we're members of his body. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is great, but I'm speaking with reference to Christ and the church. It's amazing. So here we see God's clear intention in Eden for marriage. The two becoming one as a special, unique bond that was meant to point to God's redemptive love and eternal intimacy with humanity. And this mystery, great mystery, reflects the depths of God's relationship with us. And he has chosen to reveal this through marriage. I want to bring you one more passage, and I promise I'll tie them together. We're going to look at something that Jesus taught in Matthew 5 about adultery. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. These two combined, that's where my heart breaks. That's where the heartbreak resides for those who are using pornography. Because pornography very subtly and sneakily facilitates adultery in the heart. It is adultery in the heart. And with each use, and each use that's normalized, that image of Christ becoming one with his church is diluted in the hearts of these men. And how can a person grasp this already unfathomable love and unity into which Christ calls us while they are being bombarded by the lies and deceit of sexual immorality, which distorts what sex and marriage was created to reflect? The glory of Christ and his church gets further and further out of the mind and heart's grasp within a society, as James Cordrey says, is sexually saturated. Sexual immorality distorts the great mystery that God has plotted with us since Eden. And for that, our hearts will continue to break, and our voices will continue to cry out to the church for help, to join in the healing process that's needed, to love people into truth, which includes God's abundant grace and his love, which draws us to repentance and reconciliation. It's his kindness that draws us there. Yeah. And our churches, all of you in this room, we're hoping will bring that into the lives of others. Again, I don't say this as someone who is ignorant to the effects of sexual sin in the lives of those who are exploited. I do understand that many who use and abuse pornography are often brought to the point where they are purchasing a human being for consumption. I understand the link between sexual exploitation and pornography, and that many victims are forced to be a part of the creation of pornography. But I also understand that God's heart laments for all of those who are far from him, from everyone who is having a hard time understanding God's love because of these external factors, because of sexual immorality, because of pornography. God's heart laments for them. We have an understanding in the anti-trafficking movement that no little girl grows up wanting to be in prostitution. That no little girl grows up with the dream of being exploited in pornography. And what we need to come to now is an understanding that no little boys grow up with the desire to exploit or abuse women and children. They don't grow up with a desire to consume pornography, to have dysfunction within their marriage and within their mind. They want to be cops and firefighters. And what's at the heart of this? What is at the heart of this? They want to help. They want to be strong when others need strength. And they want to be brave when others are in need of bravery. I believe that this reflects God's call for men from childhood. But it gets lost and it gets distorted. And it's up to us to help make the truth clear. So I'm very grateful for each of you in this room. As we journey together, we will reclaim what is being stolen and twisted by the Prince of Lives in the lives of all of these men. And with that, I want to introduce our first speaker. James Cordrey. We've had the pleasure of working with James a few years ago. We were linking, actually, pornography with human trafficking. And James talked with us. And the speaker who we had, I've never viewed pornography, and I felt very ashamed after the first speaker talked to us about her expertise in the field. And James, I know it wasn't a faith-based event, but James offered Jesus without saying it. And he is the author and founder of Intentional Warriors, which really is a vulnerable book where he shares his story and draws men into their actual identity in Christ and their role within this world. I'll let James come up and speak, but please consider checking out, buying his book. He has lots of blogs on his website that are hugely insightful, and all of that information is in the resource packet. And also please considering praying for him during the break and writing down what you think God might be saying to him. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you, and good morning. We're going to start with a story. When Jack was a boy, he would fall asleep at night, and in the room next to his parents would watch pornography together. Jack knew that it was pornography because he and his older brother found the VHS tape cases that went with the videos, and they saw the pictures and were attracted to those pictures. They were curious. And there were some nights when, as Jack fell asleep, he could hear the sounds of the performers in the porn movies from the room next door. That continued for a while, and when he was 10 years old, he started spending more time out of the house, what he describes as time on the streets. And what he found was that his friends and the fathers of his friends all had some stash of pornography. They either had their own that they had accumulated, or they had access to the stash that their father owned. And so that became a regular aspect of time spent with his friends, some sort of consumption of pornography. When he was 11, Jack was forced to watch hardcore pornography as his older brother and a group of older teenagers held him down in a chair and told him he had to watch. Jack and his younger friends that were being indoctrinated wanted to leave, and when they would get up to leave, they would be beaten. And their older boys would say to them, "You have to watch this, because this is how you learn what it means to be a man." At 12, Jack had his first sexual experience with another person. There was a woman in the neighborhood who was referred to as the neighborhood hooker. And there was a place where all the boys knew you could go in town and meet up with her. And so there were these boys having sexual experiences with a woman more than twice their age. When Jack was 15, he started to date. And it was understood in his circle of friends that if you had a girlfriend, you were having sex. It was just part of the deal. His environment was exceedingly sexual. So much so that in high school, Jack would meet up with girls in the bathroom during the school day and exchange sexual favors. Girls other than his own girlfriend. And it was just, this is what we do. So fractured was the relational dynamic and sexual thought in his group of friends that when his girlfriend found out that he had cheated on her, there were no repercussions. She was upset, but really nothing changed, nothing needed to change, and everything carried on. Jack graduated from high school, got a job, and everything just continued. His sexual acting out, looking at porn, hooking up with women, watching porn together with women. He even fathered a child, but didn't marry his son's mother. His whole life was about acting out his sexual compulsions. At 22, somebody introduced him to Jesus. And he came into a relationship where he put his faith in Christ. And for a while, all that stuff went away. No drugs, no drinking, no sex, nothing. But that didn't last very long. Just a couple years later, he had a girlfriend. She cheated on him. All of his compulsions, all of his anger, everything flared back up, and he went right back into it. Eventually, he met a woman that he wanted to marry, and she gave him an ultimatum. She said, if you want to be with me, you got to stop that. Can't do any more of that. And he really wanted to marry this woman, so he worked really hard. He tried to just give it all up, but he never could completely. They got married, and after just a few years, Jack's wife found porn on his phone, and it was over. She divorced him. Is it any wonder that now at 41, Jack watches pornography just about every day for stretches of time? Is it any wonder that he feels this tension in his life between what he knows is destructive, what he knows is wrong, what he knows has actually brought a lot of ruin in his life, and yet a pull to the thing that he learned at a very early age about this is how you do life. You follow your sexual compulsion. You follow your urges. It's guys like Jack who make sex trafficking possible. Either they're the direct customers and they're buying, or they're just creating a world in which trafficking can thrive because of their consumption of pornography. And it's really easy to think about a man like Jack, someone who would pay for sex, and just think, well, they're just perverts. Like, why can't they get their act together? Can't they see that's wrong? It's hurting somebody. But it makes all the difference in the world when you know their story. When you get into, well, what is it exactly that is going on behind that scene? The thing you can see, the purchasing of sex, the sexual acting out. Dan Allender, who's a clinical psychologist and an author, has written extensively on trauma, sexual abuse, and related issues. And he says that a person's story is like a crime scene. There's a debris field, fragments, pieces, half-developed things, fractured things, abused things. And there's this debris field that we need to walk into. We need to study it. We need to ponder it. And we need to pray. There are stories in this room, right? Whenever you meet anyone, you're interacting with somebody who has a complex and messy story behind whatever you see. There are stories of joy and pain, victory and defeat, celebration, despair, hope, loss. And ultimately, they are stories of brokenness and what we have done with our brokenness. All of us, every one of us. Most people keep these below the surface. You don't broadcast where you're weak and where you're damaged to the world. But if you're a guy like Jack, he's living with that right on the surface all the time. Not a day goes by that he's not struggling with, yep, I did it again, another 3-hour binge on the internet. Or somehow I managed not to do that. Whew, I don't even know how I got through the day without looking at porn, but somehow it happened. And most people hear a story like Jack's, and they feel a sense of hopelessness, like, wow, what's going to happen in the rest of Jack's life? How's that ever going to change? They think freedom or healing, totally impossible for a guy like Jack. And there are plenty of days when he feels exactly the same way about his own life. But the thing that I want to say to you, and the thing that I say to Jack over and over when I talk with him, is real change is really possible. It is. I'm also here to tell you that it's not easy. It simply isn't easy. But it is absolutely worth it. It is worth it to pursue change. It is worth it to pursue healing. It is worth it to pursue wholeness of heart for yourself and for walking alongside somebody who is struggling. It is absolutely worth it because it's what we're made for, right? Jesus said, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come that they might have life and have it to the full. The design, the intent is that we would live and live fully. You're here today because you work in the sex trafficking world in some way in terms of bringing healing, trying to help and bring wholeness. That's admirable. It's needed. You want to mentor. You want to work with men who might be on the purchasing side of it. That's absolutely what we need. But it must be said, too, that we will never be able to lead someone farther than we have gone ourselves. So put another way, we ought not teach or lead something that we haven't lived. All right? So the invitation is not that you've got to be perfect, not that you've got to have everything together, but that we, if we're going to work with men, if we're going to have something to offer to these men, that we would do it from a place of being on the journey of wholeness ourselves. So that invites some questions, right? It invites questions like, where am I in even contemplating or dealing with my own sexual brokenness? Right? I mean, that right there might be a category you've never even thought about for yourself. Where's sexual brokenness in my life? I wasn't abused. I've never paid for sex, right? You think that's the category of sexual brokenness. Those are the people who are broken. But in truth, we live in a fallen world where we've learned things about sex that aren't whole. We've participated probably in things to some degree or another that weren't God's design for sex. And so there's a degree of brokenness that we have to reckon with in our own lives. It invites us to ask questions about where are we in terms of facing our own shame, our own trauma. Again, a topic that you may not even think about in terms of your own life. But if we're going to pursue real change, and if it is really going to be possible, these are questions we ask. We also need to settle in for the fact that there are no quick fixes with this. It's not 3 steps, here you are, you're done. I run a group for men called Intentional Warriors, and we deal with men like Jack. Jack is a member of the group, in fact. And men often come into the group because they experience a crisis of some kind that exposes their sexual brokenness. They're acting out, whatever it is. If they were paying for sex, if they had a porn addiction, all along the spectrum of ways that you can have a compulsive sexual behavior in your life. And a lot of times guys come in and they say something like this, I'm really just here to get this problem fixed and get on with my life. One guy even said, I'd pay $10,000 or really any amount of money to just have this be fixed, to just have it go away. And I understand the sentiment, but rather than quick fixes, God offers us something a whole lot better, which is a process. It's a process of healing our hearts and making us whole. Because while sobriety is good, healing is much better. So, Ezekiel 26:25 through 26. God says, I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. I will cleanse you from all your impurities and from all your idols. I will give you a new heart, put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. God's intention is a new heart. That's what he offers. A heart that's not stone, not dead, not unresponsive, not cold, but alive, made alive, beating like a heart of flesh, right? And Jeremiah, in talking about this and the new covenant, God says, this is the covenant. God says, I'll put my law in their minds and I'll write it on their hearts. There is this new heart reality that is where real change comes from. So real change is possible, and it will come if we take a journey into that, into embracing and living from a new heart. The path to that involves or requires wisdom, restoration, embracing our identity, freedom. That's how we can find healing from sexual brokenness. So in order to become wise, let's just take a journey into just being wise about this for a second. The truth is, it's not about sex. It's not. Porn isn't about sex. Sex trafficking isn't about sex. It has nothing to do with sex. Sex is the context in which the brokenness is being expressed. But sex is not what this is about at all. It's about a search for life. It's about a search for wholeness. It's about a search for connection. In October of 2000, I was invited to speak to a group of Christian students at the University of Pennsylvania. And I used to do that. I was in ministry. I was on staff at a church, and I had some connections there. So they invited me to come down, and they wanted me to give a talk about kind of like, for lack of a better phrase, a seeker-friendly talk that they could invite their friends to that would be about God and would have some biblical content, but it would be mostly kind of merging that with life as we know it and culture. So I said, sure, I'll come down and I'll speak. And I remember we got there, and there was a problem with our room assignment. They had to move us out of a room. They put us in this really small room. I think it probably seated 10 people, and there's about 30. So people are sitting on the floor, and I get up to speak, and I begin, and I'm telling stories, I'm making cultural references, I'm referring to the Bible. And about 10 minutes into my talk, my internal dialogue starts, which used to happen to me all the time when I would give a talk, either at my church or elsewhere. And the internal dialogue starts like this. So how's it going? That guy looks pretty bored. Yeah, he looks kind of mad, actually, this guy over here. I don't think he liked what you said. Okay. Yeah, no, they're not laughing at that joke you just told. Like, what was that about? So I try to shut him up, keep going on my talk. And a few minutes later, it kicks in again. He says, you're really bad at this. Yeah, you have no idea what you're talking about. You should just leave now. I can't believe you said yes to this speaking engagement. Who are you kidding? I'm starting to go a little bit deeper, spiral into a little bit more self-condemnation. Finally, it's just like, you suck. You just suck. So I'm kind of in free fall at this point emotionally. I can tell no one's really connecting with what I'm saying. And there's a part of me that wants to just leave, right? But it's like, oh, that would be super awkward. So, so I'm looking around the room, and I noticed sitting on the floor against the back wall, because it's this really tight space, these two college women, very attractive. And I think, I need to get their attention. I need to connect with them. I need them to look at me. I need them to smile. And I started working at getting some sort of connection with them, a look, what have you. Wasn't really happening. And now I'm feeling this internal ache. It's like really flaring, like just lots of self-condemnation, self-loathing of, you are wasting everybody's time and they won't even connect with you. And I'm just hoping for something to make me feel better in this moment. So I'm continuing. I'm not getting any eye contact. I'm not getting anything positive. The talk ends. Polite applause. Shake of the hand. It's a Christian group after all. Hey, nice job, brother. I'm just thinking to myself, that was not good. And I know that it wasn't good, but you're being polite and, okay. So I'm milling around and I'm thinking, I want to stick around, and nobody really seemed that interested in talking to me. And I thought, one last chance, maybe I can connect with those women. Just something in me was aching for that. They hightail it out of there. Like, not talking to this speaker. What does he know about anything? And so I'm walking to my car. And I get to my car. And as I'm opening the door to my car, the very first thought I have is, there's an adult bookstore not far from here. And I knew, because I'd been there multiple times. And I kind of shrugged that off. I'm like, no, don't do that. But already I'm into that cycle that I knew so well of, I shouldn't do that, but I really want to do that. That would be a wrong thing to do. I'm starting to not care that it's a wrong thing to do. And it just keeps going down and down. I get in my car, I pull out to the traffic light, a left turn takes me home, a right turn takes me to the adult bookstore, and I turned right. I wasn't looking for sex that night. I wasn't looking for porn, per se. I was looking for life. I was looking for connection. I was looking for something to make that ache of self-loathing go away. Thomas Aquinas says that all sin is an attempt to meet legitimate needs in an illegitimate way. Right? Affirmation, validation, significance, connection, all of those are healthy things. They're part of healthy human attachment in relationships. But what I was doing was very broken. Like, even before I went to the adult bookstore, what's going on in that talk when I'm thinking, I need to get something. I need these women to feed this gaping hole in my heart that's just totally messed up. Somehow, their validation or their affirmation is going to make me okay. And it just went from there into some sort of sexual acting out, because I had sexualized all those searches for life at that point in my life. That is the condition of a person who deals with a compulsive sexual behavior, like watching porn in an addictive pattern, or paying for sex, or any of those things. What we want to grow to understand, and what I'm hoping you'll begin to appreciate, is something that G.K. Chesterton said. He said that every man who knocks on a brothel door is knocking for God. Every man who knocks on a brothel door is knocking for God. And to put that into like a more modern day thought, although knocking on a brothel door is very modern day when you think about sex trafficking. Michael Cusick, the author and counselor, wrote a book called Surfing for God, in which he uses the Chesterton quote as his premise. And he says, If that's true, that every man who knocks on a brothel door is knocking for God, then every man who's surfing the internet for porn is surfing for God. It's not about sex. It's not. And we will move into real healing, and we'll have the opportunity to experience real healing when we are settled about that and we go beyond just the acting out. So how? How do we move into real change? How do we do that? We have to start with mercy. Scripture says that mercy triumphs over judgment. One of the reasons why mercy triumphs over judgment is because judgment compounds shame. And then shame leads to more acting out. Shame is the belief that I'm bad, I'm wrong. Right? There's just, I'm a mistake. So Michael Cusick, who wrote Surfing for God and runs intensives for men, says that shame makes the world go round. It's one of his sayings. And what he means by that is not just sexual acting out and shame, but so many of our behaviors, so many of our attempts to grab a little bit of comfort, a little bit of relief, a little bit of significance, have a shame motivation or a shame component in them. So, why do I wear a mask when I'm around people in social situations? Why do I have to be the funny guy or the smart guy? Because I don't want to let you too close, because then you'd see who I really am and you'd reject me. Right? Why do I need to be in control all the time? Keep everything so tightly buttoned up? Well, because not having things right, not having things in control, not having things taken care of is a sign of weakness, and I can't be weak. Or if I get the answer wrong, or I don't know something in a conversation, then I'm wrong. I'm just at my core wrong. And there's all these ways that shame plays out in non-sexual ways, but it absolutely plays out in sexual ways. And it fuels all of those efforts to grab a little bit of something. And pornography or paying for sex is the manifestation of that. The iceberg. Scientists tell us that only 10% of an iceberg is above the waterline. The other 90% is where you can't see it. So that's where things like shame operate. That's where my broken attempt to get validation operates. That's where my self-loathing operates. That's where my sense of, never good enough, never measured up. That's where all that stuff is there below the waterline, fueling what happens above, fueling the part that you can see. So we need mercy because we need to get below the waterline. If we have any hope of helping men who are buying sex, whatever form that takes, we've got to get below the waterline. And that's what I'm inviting you to do, to start thinking about when you're talking with men, when you're involved in this work, to say, okay, this is the behavior above the waterline. But what's behind that? What's underneath that, right? Everybody's got a story. Everybody's got a story. Mercy is crucial because when a person experiences that acceptance of mercy, where they know you're welcomed here, you are valued here, not what you do, we're not endorsing your behavior in any way, but who you are, you're fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, you have value, mercy on that, they will begin to know it's safe for me to really let you in, right? Because somebody who operates in shame, somebody who operates in, dodging things, they're very talented at, I'm never letting anybody down there, ever. I'm never letting you that close to me. But mercy creates safety. It creates the place where they know we're not going to condemn you for what you're doing. We are going to love you, and out of that love, we're going to work on all the stuff that's below that waterline. And we absolutely must go there. One of the things that we'll find when we go below the waterline is that there's trauma down there. There's trauma in our lives. Very obviously, when you hear a story like Jack's, you think, sure, it's pretty easy to identify trauma there, right? But we all have some element of trauma in our lives. And just briefly, there are three different kind of categories of trauma. There's capital T trauma, which is the really very easily identified kind of trauma. Physical abuse, sexual abuse, something happens, there's an event that causes harm. Really easy to identify. Less easy to identify is lowercase t trauma, which is kind of more subtle. Maybe it's words that were spoken. Maybe it's a look that was given. Maybe it's just something really almost nonchalant that happens that you would easily dismiss or not even pay attention to. And then there's trauma by omission, which is the hardest kind to really see or identify. And this is just things that should have been present in a relationship that weren't. John Eldridge tells a story of a young man who, when he was a little boy, desperately wanted time with his father, as most little boys do. I have 3 boys of my own. They're not little anymore, but now they don't want time with dad so much. But little boys just want to connect with their dads, and they want time with him. And this young man in the story says that when he was a little boy, maybe 5 or 6, his dad had an office in his house. And his dad spent a tremendous amount of time in the office with the door closed. So this young boy, when he was about 5 or 6, would sit outside his father's office with the door closed. And he would write notes and slide them under the door, hoping for a response, hoping maybe one day a note would come back, hoping maybe that the door would even open, and he would either be let in or his father would come out and be with him. He never got a response. That's trauma. He should have gotten a loving, involved, connected response. Now, the thing about Jack's story, as I tell it to you, is it's really easy to identify his trauma. It kind of jumps out, particularly in the way that I told it to you. But if you met Jack, you would quickly notice that he minimizes that. He minimizes his trauma. When he told his story to our Intentional Warriors group, there were points in his story in which he laughed. There was even one point in his story when he was about to say something and he prefaced it by saying, you know, it's funny, but... Is there anything funny about Jack's story? There's nothing funny about that story. It's tragic. But that's usually how people handle their trauma. If we all sat here and exchanged stories, most of us would do the exact same thing. We'd minimize it. We'd find ways to talk around it. We just wouldn't really treat it with the gravity that it needs. We would say things like, and lots of people say things like this, well, lots of people have it rougher than I had it. Or, my dad did the best he could. Or some people get spiritual and they say, I forgive them. Or some people go really high stakes spiritual and they say, God's in control. Now, every one of those statements has some element of truth about it, right? Right? Lots of people do have it rougher than you have it. Thank God that you don't have it as rough as you could have had it. But this isn't some contest, right? It's a race to see who had it the worst, and they have trauma, and nobody else does. That's not how it works. You lived a life, however hard it was, and things were done, and you were hurt. Most likely your father did the best he could, unless he was a horrible person. But he's a broken man in a broken world. I know I've harmed my kids. And this isn't permission to go beat up on your mom and your dad. That's not what this is about. It's just recognizing that we've been harmed. Things have happened in our lives that hurt us. Yes, forgiveness is good. Yes, there are various ways to understand and grapple with God being in control and what that means, but none of that should be used in the service of dismissing the real pain of someone's life. I mean, if Jack had told his story in our group, and we had responded with, "Brother, that's all right. God's in control," what would that have done to him? I'll tell you what, it would have been additional trauma, actually. Dan Allender says that too often our theologies are efforts to escape the stories that we don't know what to do with. Too often our theologies are efforts to escape the stories that we don't know what to do with. We can't fall into that. It is critical that we not go there and just spiritualize something or dismiss it, but to face it. As Allender said, to walk into that crime scene and to see the fragmentation, to study it, to ponder it, and quite frankly, to honor each other in the sitting with those stories in their brokenness. I suggest to you that it's actually a beautiful moment when you're engaging your story or somebody else's story, and your theology comes up a little short. It's actually a beautiful moment because you actually, in that moment, have an opportunity to meet God, to invite him in and say, there is no verse, there is no little theological principle that I can tie this up with and call it done. I will sit with you in your pain. I will sit with you in your distress. And I will love you and show you mercy. Absolutely critical. Because if we minimize our stories, we miss the opportunity for legitimate healing, right? If you just tie that up with something spiritual, then you have not ventured under the waterline. You have not said, we are going to see what real healing looks like for the things that happened that shouldn't have, or the things that should have happened that didn't. This event is called Pure Man, and that's good. Purity is a good thing. Sobriety is a good thing. But the thing that's really important to us to understand is that purity is actually not the goal. Because purity is a byproduct of freedom. Byproduct of a free heart, that Ezekiel heart that I was talking about, a new and free heart. And when you start to live from that, and when you start to cultivate that, purity is a byproduct. It flows from that. Sobriety is great. We have this saying in Intentional Warrior, sobriety is great, but healing is even better. New life is better. Not looking, not buying sex is great. Aspire to that. But what's even better than that is the abundant and full life that Jesus says he offers. That's where we're going. That's what we're looking for. At Intentional Warriors, we really focus on three things. We focus on free hearts, healed sexuality, and warrior identity. We embrace the identity that we were made in the image of God and the way that he is a warrior God in the redemptive and best way that that can be expressed. That he has fought for us, that he has pursued us, that Jesus came as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and that God continues to fight for the hearts of his people. And as we do that, we learn how to live from a free heart and find healing for our sexuality. And the group has all walks of life in it. It has guys who have paid for sex. It has guys who have never paid for sex, but have been addicted to pornography for 20 years. We've got guys who are CEOs. We've got guys who work at Chipotle. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We're men with stories, and we hold those stories together, one to another, as a brotherhood, expressing mercy, saying, we are going to pursue this. We are going to fight for each other together. And we have a text thread that guys are on, and all the time, guys are texting, hey, this is where I am right now. Cover me in prayer. Or, hey, this is what happened. Look at how God came through. We build a brand of brothers that way. And we need it. Because, my goodness, to do something like this alone would be ridiculous. Ridiculous. I understand, because I lived it. The shame, the fear, all leads you to isolation. Like, I can't tell anybody about this. Are you kidding me? And the stakes seem to go a little higher. Like, if you're in a ministry, or you're in a pastorate, or you're somewhere else, who can I tell this to? They'll run me out of town. We create the environment. It's safe here. We will go below the waterline. We will treasure each other's hearts in our own hearts, and we will push forward together. It is not a quick fix. It is the long haul. It is a journey. And many guys, sadly, who have come into the group have found that, hey, when there was no quick fix, they bailed. I used to have a list of contact numbers in my phone, and I would scroll through it every once in a while. I'd be like, wow. Yeah. They fell off the face of the earth. God bless them. Seriously, I hope that they are okay. But they weren't in for the brotherhood, and they weren't in for the environment that we were trying to create. We believe firmly that a free heart is worth fighting for. We believe it with all of our hearts, and we are learning to live as men with the new heart that Ezekiel talks about. There are 4 keys, and these are not steps. So like I said, there's no 3 easy steps. These aren't actually 4 steps to being fixed. These are actually 4 categories that we operate in, and we move fluidly among them all the time. One of them is come clean. You've got to get yourself out into the light. You've got to tell the story with somebody you trust. Here's what's really going on with me. And we practice in our group bringing it into the light, transparency over and over, week after week, in between meetings. What does it mean for us to live as men in the light with one another? And by extension, living in the light with other people and what that looks like, and having wisdom about who to let in on that, but even beyond the sexual things. What does it mean for me to live transparently and openly in a healthy connection with my wife or with the people who are close to me? To not fake it, to be honest. What does that look like? In my addiction, I had become such a dishonest person. I actually reached a point in my recovery where I was realizing I don't even know who I am anymore. I had to come clean. We also cultivate brotherhood, a real brotherhood where we're not going to try to fix things in 3 easy steps, but we are going to exhort one another on to what is true. Here's how you live. Here's how you live as the redeemed man with that new heart Ezekiel talked about. Here's how you do it. We pursue the healing of our wounds. All that below the waterline stuff in a more pointed way where we say, what is operating down there? What is the desire beneath the desire? The initial desire may seem like it's sex, but what's the desire beneath that desire? The knocking on the brothel door, the seeking for God. Where am I trying to act out my brokenness for healthy attachment? Where's that coming from? How do I go back into those stories of trauma and shame with God and receive healing? And then we smash our idols, which basically just means when you see something that's feeding your sin, you need to destroy it. And that also involves learning to grow into the reality of spiritual battle, right? When Paul tells us to put on the armor, what's he talking about? Why do we need the armor? How do we step into that? There's this beautiful story in 2 Kings 22 and 23 about King Josiah. And I encourage you to go back and read it, but in a Cliff Notes version of that, King Josiah becomes king when he's 8 years old. 18 years later, they discover the book of the law. Somehow it had been misplaced. They're doing some renovation work. Boom, here it is. He immediately responds to it. One of the comments about King Josiah in 2 Kings is that his heart was responsive to God. He responds to God. He turns his ways, and he orders that all of the temples and all of the idols that had been set up in the land be destroyed. And it's a pretty brutal section of Scripture from that standpoint. We take that to mean what needs to be put to the sword in our own lives. In my story, there was a point at which we actually made a decision, my wife and I, to have the internet taken out of our house because I just couldn't have it in the house. That's smashing an idol. So we can't do it in isolation. None of these things can happen in isolation. Right? You need to do some work on your own for sure. Right? Be alone with God. Get in His Word. But that all requires community. Every part of that. And that's what Intentional Warriors is. It's this brotherhood. So back to the adult bookstore. I took that right. I drove in. I pull into the parking lot, and it is crowded. And that initially made me a little nervous, because when I went there, I usually tried to time it so that there weren't a lot of people around, because I didn't know if I might run into somebody, or I would never want somebody coming to the church where I would stand up and preach saying, hey, wait a minute, I saw that guy at that place. So I was always very careful about that. But at this point, I was in such a downward spiral that I registered the fact that it was crowded, and I said, I got to have my fix. So I go in, people everywhere. I go into a booth, watch some videos on a machine, and I'm clicking through the channels, and just nothing's working. Meaning, the videos are showing, but it's just not happening for me. There's not something I'm finding to land on, not something that I'm enjoying watching. I just keep clicking, clicking, clicking. And I'm putting money in the machine and putting money in the machine thinking, one of these channels, it's going to get good. One of these channels, it's going to work. So after several minutes, maybe 15, I don't know, I wasn't looking at a watch. I was really agitated. This wasn't coming together for me. And I heard some weird noise outside my booth and started to feel kind of nervous, like what's going on out there? And there's all these people, and is something going to happen? And then I'm going to be caught in some scene, and it's going to be like, oh, on the news, like there was this thing that happened at this place, and look who's there on the camera. So I was really agitated, and I couldn't settle down, and I felt weird. So I walk out. I go to my car, and I get in, and my car won't start. Now, this was my great porn nightmare, that I would be at a strip club or buying porn or at an adult bookstore, and my car would break down. It didn't keep me from going all those years, but it was still my nightmare, because then I'd be found out, or what would I do then? So I don't know much about cars, so when a car won't start, my first thought is, oh, it needs a jump. I'm trying, nothing. So I'm like, I'm going to have to get somebody to give me a jump. This car comes in, parks. I jump out of my car. I'm like, hey, man, can you give me a jump? My car won't start. He's like, I was breaking the code, right? Like, we don't talk to each other in here, you know? So I was like, come on. He's like, no, man, you're on your own. So I'm sitting there, and I'm really starting to panic now. What am I going to do? And so I look at the door, and I say, I'm going to have to go back in there and ask somebody for a jump. So I walk back in. I walk up to the cash register. There's people. I still remember some of the, like, where certain people were standing. There was a man and a man and a woman here. There's this other guy here, these two guys in the back, and these other guys are, like, circled around over here. And I go up to the front, and there's a cashier there, and I say, hey, can anybody give me a jump? My car won't start. And they're all kind of like this, right? Did somebody just talk to us? And they're looking away. And there's this moment, silent, sort of tense, and without thinking, just rising out of me with a shaky voice, I said, "You don't understand. I can't be here." And then they really went like this. There is no honor among thieves. So I run back out to my car. And now I'm sitting there going, so how's this going to end? Am I going to call AAA? And I have to explain where the car was towed from to my wife. I certainly can't call somebody to come get me because then I'd have to admit where I am. So I'm really in a sweat at this point, just freaking out. And like I said, I don't know much about cars. So I'm sitting there, and I look down, and my car is not in park. And I know enough to know that if I want my car to start, at least this particular car, it has to be in park. So, into park, fire the thing up, and I peel out of the parking lot. I drive home. My wife asks about how was the talk. I tell her about the talk. Tell her nothing else. I start to kind of come down off my shakes a little bit by the time I got home. Now, that was a scary experience. But I'll tell you what, a day later, I was telling myself, it's okay, I got this. I can manage this. Nothing needs to change. I'm good. The reality is, to do these things, to get below the waterline, men need to be drawn. Men do not voluntarily say, hey, let me come to a group that's going to deal with porn addiction and compulsive sexual behavior. It takes a crisis. It takes something. And that something, for me, was 2 weeks later after that adult bookstore experience. I'm having a conversation with my wife. I was packing a suitcase to go on a business trip. My wife starts telling me about how she had recently been to visit our friends Andy and Lori that we went to college with, who live about an hour away. And Lori says to my wife, Carolyn, she says, hey, our pastor preached on pornography last week. He does that every, probably about 2 or 3 times a year. And every time he preaches on pornography, when we get in the car to go home, Andy turns to me and says, Lori, I want you to know that since the day we've been married, I have not looked at pornography. Now, normally, at this point in the conversation, my antenna would have been sky high, and I would have been rapidly recalculating where we're going to take this conversation. But I missed it. And so Lori says to my wife, does James ever say anything like that to you? And Carolyn goes, as she's telling me the story, she goes, so I was thinking about that. I'm like, I'd really like that. So she turns to me and she says, well? Now, in that moment, I did what all liars do. I skated or attempted to skate on a technicality. And the technicality was, I said, well, honey, warm language, honey, I can't say that. And what I was referring to was that early in our marriage, extremely early in our marriage, I had bought a porn magazine, and I was so broken up about it as a young husband that I voluntarily confessed. And it was painful, and it was ugly, and I made a decision that I would never do that again. Not never look at porn, that I would never be open about it, that I would never let her know about it. So here I am, attempting to skate on my technicality. Fortunately, I don't have a wife who would just take that and let it be. And she said, well, I know about that time, but... And I stood there frozen. And without saying a word, I was saying everything. Something was up. And that night was the first of many painful conversations in which the reality of who I was and the dark secret that I had came into the light over a series of conversations, over a series of months, and it thrust me into this journey of, I've got to come clean. I've got to do these things. And I did, and real change is really possible. Because I am not that man. I'm not who I was. I had to be drawn, though, right? I had a scary experience. That wasn't enough. Because I still convinced myself I could handle it. And our men need mercy. Our men need compassion. Our men need to go below the waterline, and they need to be drawn. And we have the opportunity to draw them. Real change is really possible. Lasting freedom is available. And we have the need for courage to walk into the debris field of this crime scene and bring life. If you want to connect with me, that's how you can do it. It's intentionalwarriors.com. My email is james@intentionalwarriors.com. And I am also on Twitter @intentwarriors.com. Thank you.